All right. Thank you everyone for coming today. Today is the 6th in our 6-part series on continuous improvement adjacent topics. So the last 5 are available on Microsoft Stream. And today's topic is an introduction to human-centered design. So you might notice the presentation looks a little bit different today because I cribbed it entirely from a workshop that they put together in terms of training for it, that I cut down drastically because it's a full day workshop and we've got an hour. So we're going to be moving fast through a bunch of different parts, but hopefully we'll have some time for an exercise at the end where we'll get to take some of the things we talked about today and put it into practice. So I encourage you all to stick it out to the end. So just a bit of a teaser for the next series. So after we're done today, this will be the last one. There'll be a little bit of a break. 6 weeks is a lot. But I will be back hopefully with some other green belts to help with some trainings of their own. One class that will definitely be in the next series is on developing surveys and using Microsoft Forms. So be on the lookout for that one to headline the next series. So let's go ahead and talk about human-centered design. Make sure to include system audio. Okay. So hopefully everyone will be able to see my training here, an introduction to human-centered design. So human-centered design is a process around continuous improvement, much the way that Lean or DMAIC or Six Sigma are. And it's a way of thinking about a problem and coming up with solutions. So there are lots of elements in human-centered design that I really have enjoyed and appreciated. And if after today's training you're interested in learning more about human-centered design, there are trainings on IDEO that I think it's a 12-week course. It's a not inconsiderable time commitment, but I found it to be very valuable. And I'll just give you the headlining pieces of information today about how the process works. And if it is interesting to you, I'll provide the link to follow up probably in Microsoft Stream. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. Might help if I clicked in the right area. There we go. Okay, so we're going to be spending a little bit of time on the mindsets and methodology of human-centered design. It's a little bit of a mind shift from where Lean and other continuous improvement methodologies exist. In particular, it's got to focus on getting information and inspiration from real people. And it's a human-centered design. So the human part of that is very focused on reaching out to people and involving people in your process. So there are a lot of times in state government where that makes a lot of sense. And there are some times when there's pushback to that. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we can use that in state government. It involves a lot of communications, interviews, collecting information from real people, and then you have to bring that information in, parse it into pieces that can be used as part of your design process. There's a brainstorming that forms a fairly large foundational piece to this effort. I found that their brainstorming exercise is fairly loose, but you can adapt any sort of brainstorming techniques onto it, and it works pretty much just as well. But we'll be talking about their brainstorming techniques. And then how you can use those brainstormed ideas to build and test ideas through prototyping and rapid feedback. And there's a little bit at the end on how to continue to grow those skills, including that training that I mentioned. So we're going to go ahead and jump to this video real quick. Hopefully you'll all be able to hear the audio.
Human-centered design is a creative approach to problem solving, one that starts with people and ends with innovative solutions tailored to meet their needs. When you understand the people you're trying to reach and then design from their perspective, not only will you arrive at unexpected answers, but you'll come up with ideas that they'll embrace. Human-centered design is both how you think and what you do with it. It's a process that consists of 3 phases: inspiration, ideation, and implementation. The inspiration phase is about learning on the fly, opening yourself up to creative possibilities, and trusting that as long as you remain grounded in the desires of the people you're designing for, your ideas will evolve into the right solution. In the ideation phase, you come up with lots of ideas. Some too crazy to work, some too crazy not to try, and you'll refine them, tossing out the bad and improving the good. Making things helps you learn, grow, and test your ideas. Building a simple prototype gets your idea tangible and gives you something to put right back into the hands of the folks you're designing for. Without their input, you won't know if your solution is on target or how to evolve your idea. Keep iterating, testing, and integrating feedback until you've got everything just right. During the implementation phase, you'll build partnerships, shore up your business model, and get your idea out into the world, which was always the goal in the first place. Anyone can practice human-centered design, and everyone benefits because it gets us all to solutions that are adopted and embraced.
All right, so that covers the gist of why you might use human-centered design. A lot of the training materials are focused on products and manufacturing things. But I found where human-centered design is really powerful is anytime you need to create something new. So in a lot of cases, we come into lean events without much of a process and we've got to build one. This is a great way to do that too. But we're going to talk a little bit about more what human-centered design means. So functionally speaking, when you're developing any new solution to any given problem, you have to focus on 3 distinct areas. Those are, is it viable to do the work? Is it feasible in terms of can you actually make it happen? And then are the human beings who have to interact with it going to use it and use it effectively? And I found that that's often a gap between the processes that we design in the state and then the people that we interact with, where, or even processes we design for ourselves, is it could be the greatest process in the world, but if no one's going to use it, then why did we bother? And that's where human-centered design comes in. Instead of saying, well, let's look at what we can do and what the technology can do first, and then come around on the human piece after it or ignore it altogether, as we sometimes do, you don't actually end up changing anything. So human-centered design wants to start with the human elements, start with the people involved, and make sure that whatever you're going to do, however you're going to do it, brings the humans in first. So there's a mindset that it helps to adopt in human-centered design, and it's an innovation mindset, really. It's about being creative and empathic. You have to connect with people and make this a people-centered process, otherwise it won't be as successful. Understand that there's a lot of ambiguity and complexity in the world, and that that's okay, and the trust in the process to get through that. And then make it. So a lot of times we get in this planner paralysis where we plan to make plans to make plans. It's very much about doing it, learning from failure, and iterating as you learn. And having the optimism that as long as you're taking a human-centered design approach, that you're designing for the people, and you continue to design for the people and the business, and you factor those elements in, that you will ultimately be successful. So in those mindsets, there are 3 main phases, and the video kind of outlined them. And for some of you that are in DEC, you might recognize some elements of this from DEC Futures, although it didn't reach its grand design that I might have envisioned. The first is the inspiration phase. So it's about understanding people, collecting information, observing their lives, desires, getting them involved in the process, and understanding what it is they need and want in order for your project to be successful. Next is ideation. So it's a long gap between what people want and what you can give them. So ideation is the chance to bring in all the information that you've gotten from the human beings that you've interacted with to design and test and create something new. And then implementation is where we do that, deploy it, test it, reiterate and iterate and iterate until we get a solution that works. And part of it's stepping away from that fear that we have in state government of sometimes we're too afraid to fail to actually just implement something and try. But it's about understanding the risks and ultimately ending up with a better solution. So it sort of takes this loose arc, and this whole training is sort of separated into these three sections. It sort of starts with a challenge that you want to overcome and then diverges as you collect disparate pieces of information that just kind of seem all over the place. In the ideation phase, we will then converge that information. So taking a whole bunch of pieces of information, condense it a little bit, and then it expands again as you roll out some implementation. And then as you iterate towards a final solution, things will come back down. So in the inspiration phase, we've got 4 major steps, which are frame your design challenge, do research, create a plan, and then do your field research. So it actually involves going out and talking to people. Now in state government, that can mean a lot of things like surveys or focus groups, but this is very much about interviews and talking to human beings and having conversations. So one of the things you want to do is seek sources of inspiration. So a lot of the problems that we deal with are solved in other places or partially addressed in other ways. So you can find them by talking to the people, the types of people that might be interacting with whatever solution you're developing, experts in your field, analogous inspiration. So those are situations where at first glance, it doesn't seem like the thing that you're looking at is the same type of problem, but still has the same energy or some of the same types of steps involved, or immersion. So this is really great when you actually go out into the field and try and live the experience, or go through and actually apply to a permit that you're overseeing. It's about experiencing the thing so that you can have some sparks of inspiration from that. So we want to seek information from all of these sources. And as you collect and you gather that information, you want to not just understand how they interact with the tools and mechanisms, but also understand them as a person. And like, it's a big part of your life because you do this for a living. It might be a very small fraction of their life that they associate with 6 other things. What are those 6 other things that they associate it with? And they're trying to live their lives, and they touch us in very specific ways. So understanding how the ways in which they touch us, express themselves, and interact with us, all those are important as we consider potential solutions to problems. And then understanding the context. So if there are specific challenges that individual people face, it's up to you to embrace that, empathize with those challenges, and try and figure out how to help them overcome those challenges with the solutions that you design. Because I had to cut a lot out, I think it's like a 70. You can see the slide numbers down here. We're up to 35 in the full workshop. If there are a bunch of people that are interested in a full workshop, I would consider giving that, but given the hour-long nature of these trainings, I thought it was best to cut a lot of stuff out. So there's a lot more on inspiration. There's a whole protocol around having conversations with people and setting up interviews to collect information. But in the ideation phase is where we take all that information that we've expressed through interviews and all those sources of inspiration and begin to start adapting some solutions. It starts with the synthesis phase, where we're going to download those learnings and convert them into how might we questions, which serve as a focus for brainstorming. And then eventually prototyping. So instead of a process map, the ideation phase of human-centered design focuses on a storyboard, because it's not about a fact-based this step, then this step, then this step. It's about following a human being as they experience things, and what are the things they experience, and how do they experience, and how do they feel while they're experiencing those things. It's a very different mindset, but it's a very valuable perspective. So I go into a little bit more detail in this section than I do in the other sections. It's the one that I have the most experience with, because I tend to get a lot of pushback when I try and push for getting the sources of inspiration and going to the people and involving our customers in the process. But the ideation phase is also a lot of fun. So you have a lot of transcripts of conversations and a lot of sources of inspiration and a lot of research that you've done that feeds into this process. But the general process of downloading those learnings is with a bunch of sticky notes, writing down the person that you talked to, memorable quotes, everything that stood out to you from all those interactions and moments, and talk about all of them together. And this is a very strong group activity. It's very hard to do this kind of work alone. And that's why even in the training, they say you can take it alone, but I found it much more powerful with some extra people. So once you've written down all those various pieces of information, you can start to group them into themes. So if so-and-so is experiencing a certain kind of challenge and someone else has a different challenge, but they're sort of related, you can sort of try different ways of pushing that information together and grouping that information, because it's the varieties of groups and experiences that you want to try and condense into a much smaller piece. And you can try and name each cluster, and you might have to change the name a couple of times in order to get one that accurately fits things as you move more things into the category or move things out of the category, depending on those clusters. But you definitely want to capture those themes. Once you have those, you can craft these insight statements, and those insight statements become how might we questions. So how might we questions are really a great framing device for solving any problem. And whenever I have any brainstorming challenge now, even if I'm not using a human-centered design process, I always try and frame it as a how might we question, because how might we questions are great because they ask, what are you going to do? How are you going to do it? So affirmative and aspirational, focus on where you want to be. And getting a how might we question right is not instantly obvious, because you want something that is broad enough to allow you to be creative, but narrow enough so that you're not going all over the place in a lot of different ways. You can actually broaden and narrow the scope of how might we questions. If those of you that are familiar with the 5 whys, so the whys are really great for broadening a question. So if it feels too narrow, you can ask why this thing is happening, and it will bring you up several levels. If you feel like you're too broad and you want to narrow it, you can ask basically any of the other question asking words. So who or when or where, and those will help you narrow the how might we question that you're looking at. There's a bit of an art to picking out good how might we question that generates a lot of ideas. Yeah, so ask why to broaden, or what's stopping you to narrow. Ultimately, to solve the problem, they recommend selecting 1 to 3 how might we questions. A lot of it depends on how much time you want to spend brainstorming, because each how might we question is a brainstorming exercise. So here are examples of some narrow ones or too broad. So narrow is how might we get high school students to grow and sell vegetables for class credit. It's extremely specific. How might we eat better is extremely broad and can contain multitudes. So a nice one that sort of settles in the middle is how might we make it easy to get healthy food in low-income neighborhoods. So you could see this as being a potential way to do this. And this is a more specific subset of how might we eat better. So finding the right level of the how might we question. All right, Jill, that's a complex question. I'm going to save that for the end. I hope that's okay. Oops. So next up is the brainstorming. So they have a very simple brainstorming exercise that basically involves gather around a flip chart or a whiteboard, putting the how might we question right at the top of the brainstorming space so everyone can see it, and use post-it notes to capture the ideas, one idea per post-it note. What I like to do is take a couple of minutes for everyone to write down their ideas first, and then we talk through those, so that if you have ideas that you maybe want to share anonymously, or you just are like bubbling full of ideas and you just want to write them down in a hurry, so that what happens afterwards is more of a thoughtful discussion, and we're adding more ideas, and the ideas that we read through are inspiring new ideas. So it's a positive, productive process. In human-centered design, the goal of the brainstorming exercise is to get a lot of ideas. And they really mean a lot of ideas, and you're going to get a lot of really not great ideas. So it's important to follow the 7 brainstorming rules. And I think these are general good rules for brainstorming exercises in general. So defer judgment, encourage wild ideas, build off the ideas of others, stay focused on the topic, have one conversation at a time, be visual if that helps, and go for quantity. The emphasis there is quantity. This brainstorming exercise will generate lots and lots and lots of ideas. I've never seen one of these with a well-crafted how might we question not generate a ton of ideas. And some of them are more feasible than others, but it's all about generating a quantity, because you will be narrowing the ideas eventually, but at this phase, you just want to have as many ideas on the table as possible, not only because it might be a valid idea if you do some more thinking around it, but also it could just inspire another idea in somebody else. So it's definitely worth knocking out as many ideas as you can. I've found that it takes anywhere from 25 to 30 minutes per how might we question. So if you're planning on an activity, that's about how long that takes. More if you plan on actually doing some voting. The next phase of this is to vote on the individual ideas. Everyone can vote from 1 to 3 for 1 to 3 ideas. You can use multi-voting, you can use individual voting, but the principal idea is that you're going to go from dozens and dozens and dozens of ideas down to a much, much smaller subset. So ultimately settling on just a handful, or even 1 or 2 that you want to move forward on. Once you have an idea or 2 that you want to focus on, begins the prototyping. So prototyping in human-centered design begins with the storyboarding. So in storyboarding, you draw a picture of what's happening, and then you describe what's happening. So it's very much about take an individual, imagine this individual, tell me some things about this individual. You know, are they a father of 2 and like pressed for time? Is this a small part of their job or a big part of their job? Just imagine an actual individual and carry them through this process. That's what storyboarding is. So it's process mapping, but it's to, instead of focusing on the 80% and excluding the 20%, we're just like, take this individual through, what is their experience like, and how can we make sure it's optimal? And then you're going to rapidly prototype that. So if you have a solution that you think would work, you don't need to plan it and go through multiple iterations of planning. Just build something, whether it be a mock-up of a page, a tool, whatever problem you're trying to solve. It's about developing something and then tweaking it and adjusting it. It's called rapid prototyping. So you're constantly iterating this generic design and get feedback. So you can reach out to potential people that would be experiencing this or internal people that you trust. And you want to integrate that feedback and iterate. So it's not about deciding on a solution, putting down how you think it's going to work, and then settling on that and moving forward. It's about actually requesting feedback, and absorbing that feedback and utilizing that information to adjust and tweak and grow. Because again, it's a human-centered design, so it's about meeting the needs of the humans that you're going to be interacting with. So here's an example of a storyboard here. So you work your idea into small moments that sort of crystallize about an experience, that show how a potential customer or potential user or applicant or whatever you have, how they interact with the process. So you can title it. These pictures are much nicer than some of the ones that we've done. But you talk about the individual and then describe their experiences. So it's definitely a different mindset, but if you are interested particularly in meeting the needs of individuals, it's a much more inclusive method. So finally, you're going to finish the process with implementation. So you were iterating your prototype, now you're going to keep iterating. So keep testing, keep getting feedback, keep tweaking. This gets more complicated when we start talking IT projects, but it's about taking in that feedback and assimilating it into the overall product. Live prototyping is an example. There are basically two main ways to put your idea out into the world before a full-on rollout. One of them is a live prototyping, so that's starting with an idea and roll it out, but for a set amount of time, maybe with a set audience. And piloting is a longer-term solution, but you're only doing with a subset of your population. So you're rolling it out for a couple of operators you trust, or a specific subset of people you trust to give you good, valuable feedback so you can continue to iterate and grow your ideas. So that was a very quick rundown of human-centered design. Very, very quick. There's a lot more to it. And so there are some calls to action at the end here. So talk to someone you're designing with and ask them to share your experience. Getting that experience with interviewing and asking questions that will ultimately guide you to a better solution is something I think we don't do enough of. And it's something that leads to part of the reason why a lot of our IT projects tend to go on eternally. It's about having conversations and meeting the needs of the people and the needs of the businesses that we're interacting with. And having a better handle on that will lead to better outcomes. The how might we question is a great frame for any brainstorming exercise. And I've never found brainstorming exercises to be a waste of time. They're energizing. They generate a lot of positivity in a time where we could all use a little bit of positivity, I think. You can try to bring a prototype to prompt discussion. Sometimes it involves putting a little bit of work to bring up proposed solutions, that you have something to talk about instead of everyone showing up to a meeting and ambling in 6 different directions. So if you bring a thing that everyone can talk about, whether that's a process that you think might work, or a tool that you think might be helpful, or something of a point of reference to talk about. So those are some ways that they recommend bringing human-centered design into the way we do things. But I'm not satisfied with that number of ideas. So I want to use a little bit of human-centered design to come up with some ideas ourselves. But before I do, Jill has been patiently waiting for me to read and answer her question, so I want to do that. So how do we reconcile the need for RBA with the human-centered design approach? How do you know what you're capturing or not outliers, experience, and anecdotes? How can we center human-centered design within lean government RBA environment? Oh, she just probably left too. That's a bummer. Well, she'll have to watch the video to see me answering her question if she's not still here. So RBA is also very powerful. So one of the things that you can do is through these conversations, you can convert the things they say and want into metrics ultimately that help govern those responsibilities. So if people are saying that they're worried about a process, or that they're worried that information will bounce back to them, you can convert that into, number of applications rejected or other metrics that help to inform that process. And it also, if you start thinking about the conversations in terms of metrics, then it helps you to dig a little deeper into the data to figure out if the problem that someone experiences is part of a larger pattern or is unique to them. So outliers certainly exist, but we're all outliers in our own separate way. So human-centered design is really about taking what they say to heart and being empathetic and trying to focus on that user experience and turn it into a positive one. So any questions on that before we jump into the exercise and come up with some more? How do you do next? Or what can you do next? It's a good time for questions. Oh, yeah, RBA is results-based accountability. So results-based accountability is a framework for continuous improvement. You might have heard of Turn the Curve. Results-based accountability is about building up a set of metrics that explain how much do we do and how well did we do it. It is on the to-do list for training to cover RBA because it's briefly covered in the lean continuous improvement trainings, but results-based accountability is really powerful and a really great way to understand how performance can be measured, because a lot of times we only get so far as measuring how much we do without questioning how well it's delivering. So what is your vision for how human-centered design would proceed in concert with an A&R lean effort? Who would lead the human-centered design interview process, and how would that person interface between business group and IT group? So I've tried to use human-centered design a couple of times in some A&R lean efforts. Where I really like it is when a process doesn't already exist, because a lot of the existing lean process and existing lean projects is really about like, let's put the current state up there. Let's talk about where the value is. But if you have a problem that you're trying to confront and you have a lot of flexibility in terms of the solutions that you could come up with, I find sometimes the ideas that come out of a lean process not as out there or creative as the things that come out of a human-centered design process. So, for example, I'm working with Ethan Swift and his team right now on a human-centered design frame for their problems or their challenges, and it's really great for generating ideas that maybe wouldn't have existed in the past. But it's definitely a shift of mindset that is not natural to a lot of people that hear about this stuff for the first time. And understanding that you're going to design something around the needs of the customers and put their needs first and focusing on their process. A lot of my experience working with customers has been through experience. So I've done several focus groups. Focus groups are great for getting a lot of positive feedback. One of the things that I find really valuable is I've helped people by developing interview questions, and then you can distribute those interview questions to people that actually have relationships with the various people that you're trying to work with. That way everyone's being asked the same questions and we get a variety of answers. As far as how the person would interface between the business group and the IT group, that's a larger question that I think I'm going to push off for now. I am a fierce advocate for business analysis and business analysis tools, but it's a whole other universe of working with IT and getting that to work. So I hope that you'll forgive me that I only tackled 2 of your 3 questions. All right, so let's put a little bit of human-centered design into practice. And feel free to continue asking questions, but I also want to engage in this exercise. So the question that I've phrased is, how might we incorporate elements of the human-centered design process into our continuous improvement efforts? Now, that's a question that has a lot of potential answers, but I am curious to hear your ideas. And remember, there's no such thing as an out there idea. You know, feel free to throw out anything bonkers and crazy or simple and obvious, whatever hits you. So of the things you know about the human-centered design process now, which admittedly is not as much as those of you that might end up taking the full-on training might experience, but based on what you know now, how might we incorporate elements of the human-centered design process into continuous improvement efforts? You could talk about the types of projects that you think might be viable to use human-centered design stuff that you experience. Or you could talk more broadly about tools and facets that you see yourself implementing. Train storytellers. Okay. Aaron, can you tell us a little more about what an AIM walkthrough is? Are you talking about like AIM statements? Or
no, I'm referring to, does anyone on this call, did anyone years ago take part in the agency improvement model? It's just another, improvement methodology that the state sponsored. The Department of Health did a lot of work with AIM projects. And one of the things that you did at the beginning of any AIM project was a walkthrough. So from the perspective of the customer for that process, basically following what their experience would be, taking notes on it. It sounded similar to the first phase of this human-centered design.
yeah, I definitely see the parallels there. And you can sort of see how it's different from Lean, because Lean has interactions with people also. You go to the Gemba, right? So you go where the work's being conducted. But you see, whereas Lean is a process focus, human-centered design is a human focus. So it's focusing more on the individuals and their experiences. So Lori says we use empathy reviews in our work with networked improvement communities. Empathy interviews. That sounds really interesting. I'll have to check out that link after our training. Two-hour online meeting scheduled with stakeholders. Asking for a friend. Sure. So if you have an online meeting scheduled with a bunch of people in stakeholders, you can definitely use a I always use this word and then I focus group style techniques. So focus grouping is a very powerful way to gather information from individuals very quickly and to get their variety of opinions. What makes focus groups really interesting is that instead of the catalyst being a person thinking internally about what's my experience, what's going on with me, it almost gets focused externally because focus group people are bouncing off one another. So what you lose in terms of interpersonal experiences, you gain from somebody saying something that made someone else think of something, which made someone else think of something. So it's sort of a chain reaction of ideas. If you want help with that, Rebecca, go ahead and email me afterwards. We can talk through what you might do with 2 hours, because 2 hours is a really good amount of time for a focus group. And you can get a lot of really effective information if you follow a couple of simple rules. But unfortunately, there's a whole field of science around much like there's a whole field of science around surveys, there's a whole field of science around focus groups and having focus groups be effective. And while I am currently planning on that survey training, it's actually done, but I need a little break from all these trainings to sort of rest, recharge, and get a whole bunch ready to go again. It's more complex than we can talk about here and now. Michael says in old school quality control, there's a notion called voice of the customer that's part of process design, quality function deployment. Yeah, and when we talk about lean and we're assigning value to things, we're taught to think of value in terms of what it means to the customer. And I don't know about any of you, but we might start there, but it always gradually ends up coming back to, well, we're customers too, and we have to design a process that works for us. And sometimes the voice of the customer can get lost. Or I've advocated for including customers through part of a lean event, and the feedback I get is, well, we don't want to air our dirty laundry in front of our customers. I don't know how typical that experience is, but incorporating the views and experiences of the people that we interact with is vital to human-centered design, and it sort of forms the foundation of all the work that comes afterwards. So the fact that it comes up is in the beginning of the process, is a really great way of bringing them into the process and increasing potential adoption rates. And I just wanted to call out Karen's message earlier on, which says business analysis is fundamental in database and user interface design. It absolutely is. BAs should permeate every interaction between IT and the business. It's unfortunate that it doesn't always work out that way, at least for small projects. Any other ideas for ways in which we can use human-centered design in our process? Someone give me an example of a project they think might work really well using human-centered design, if you can brainstorm one. I can be quiet if anyone else has anything they want to say or concerns they want to talk about if they don't want to type it into the box.
I don't know if, this is Mercedes, by the way. I don't know if Teresa wants to share our experience. We actually did we took a class, and it was pretty interesting. It was hypothetical, but we did use some of that to see if we could solve a problem that we had. Is Teresa here? Are you here?
Yeah, I'm here. This is Teresa. It kind of feels like that's outside of the scope of the training just because it wasn't related to DEC. But if John, if you want us to talk about it, I think, is Maria on the call too?
All right, so the human-centered design training that they're talking about is a 12-week course out of IDEO. I know I've sent out the link a couple of times, at least to DEC Greenbelts. I took it with Justin and a couple of Greenbelts from the Agency of Transportation. We took a look at how we can grow our managers and supervisors in state government that was adopted by the Agency of Transportation. So they have a whole new protocol and way of training those people up in small, effective ways. And we had lots of conversations with lots of managers about the challenges and trials that they experience. One of which is there's a big gap between, at least this is true for A&R, between management/leadership training that's available in terms of there's a 4-day class that is mandatory for new supervisors and managers, which is SSG, which is supervising in state government. And then there's nothing except for a 2-year VCPM or a 4-year leadership and management training that A&R offers. But if someone wants to grow as a manager and supervisor, the state doesn't really offer much in terms of training or resources beyond that 4-day training and a 2-year or 4-year commitment. So that gap is something that we found through talking to people, and it's something that we moved to address as part of our human-centered design experience. Christina says at the Agency of Agriculture, they're using some elements of human-centered design to develop an agriculture recovery plan in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I'll add, based on that, it's a great time to be practicing human-centered design. We have a lot of people that are stressed and challenged, and everyone just wants to be treated a little more human and humanely in this time. So knowing that you're out there looking out for their interests and managing a process that is developed around their needs can go a long way in terms of getting buy-in and developing a process that is effective and solves the problems for the people involved. All right. Does anyone else have anything they want to add to our brainstorming exercise or add to their questions about human-centered design? I skipped over 99% of the details in human-centered design. Again, it was a full-day workshop that I condensed into an hour, so I had to cut down a lot of content. Okay. Hopefully none of you can hear my 3-year-old stopping above me. All right. So there's no more questions or concerns. I think we can go ahead and wrap here. And this is the final training in our 6-week series. But by all means, this is this is the Lean Learning Series Microsoft Stream page. I'll go ahead and drop the link again. Go ahead and share that link with anybody and everybody. Right now, it's the most subscribed channel on Microsoft Stream, and I love that. So keep it up. Share it with anyone you think might be interested in any of these trainings. And thank you all for coming to 6 weeks, or as many as you could make of these trainings. It's been a pleasure to talk about all this stuff with you guys. And I hope some of it's been informative or helpful, or just giving you a moment of reprieve in these COVID times. It's meant a lot to me, and I hope all of you have gotten something out of this. So thank you all so much.